Welcome, dear listeners, to another shadowed corner of the throne of nightmares, where the veil between the living and the damned grows thin, and the whispers of the forgotten rise like fog from forgotten graves. I am your host, the keeper of these cursed tales, and tonight we descend into the heart of the American wilderness, the Ozarks, a land of jagged hills cloaked in eternal mist, where ancient oaks twist like arthritic fingers toward a sky that never quite clears. Here, the soil is rich with secrets, soaked in the blood of generations who dared to carve out life from the unforgiving rock. But beneath the surface of folksy charm and mountain folklore lies a horror so primal, so intimately tied to the cradle of life itself, that it chills the soul to its core. Imagine, if you will, the dim glow of a kerosene lamp flickering in a one-room cabin, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and sweat. Outside, the wind howls through the pines, carrying the distant cry of a whippoorwill, a bird said to foretell death. Inside, a woman labors in childbirth, her cries muffled by the isolation of these hills, and attending her, not a kindly neighbor or a trained physician, but one of them, the midwives of the Ozarks, women whose hands have ushered countless souls into the world, their faces etched with the lines of untold years, their eyes holding shadows deeper than the hollows they call home. But these were no ordinary midwives. Whispers passed down through generations speak of a bloodline cursed, or perhaps blessed, depending on the teller, with an insatiable hunger, a hunger not for bread or water, but for the very essence of new life. They fed on their newborns, not in the metaphorical sense of a mother's devotion, but literally, grotesquely, drawing sustenance from the fragile forms they had just delivered. Flesh, blood, the tender marrow of innocence, these were their feasts, hidden behind smiles and herbal poultices. The tale of the Ozark midwives who fed on their newborns is one that has been buried in the annals of forgotten history, scrubbed from official records, and relegated to the fevered mutterings of old-timers around dying fires. Yet it persists, a spectral thread woven into the fabric of the region's dark lore. Let me draw you in slowly as the night draws its cloak around us. Picture the Ozarks not as the picturesque retreat of modern tourism, but as they were in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a labyrinth of isolated communities where the law of the land was secondary to the law of survival. Roads were little more than muddy trails, snaking through dense forests where sunlight struggled to penetrate. Families lived in log cabins, their lives dictated by the rhythms of the seasons, planting in spring, harvesting in fall, and enduring the brutal winters that claimed the weak. Births were private affairs, attended by local midwives who passed their knowledge down through matrilineal lines, a tradition as old as the hills themselves. These midwives were revered and feared in equal measure. They were the gatekeepers of life, wielding remedies forged from the wild-dye poultices of willow bark for pain, infusions of sassafras for fever, and darker herbs whose names were spoken only in hushed tones. But among a select few, a bloodline tracing back to the Scotch-Irish settlers who fled famine and persecution, there lurked an abomination. It began, or so the legends say, with a woman named Eloan Hargrove who arrived in the Ozarks in the 1840s, her past shrouded in mystery. Some claimed she was a witch from the old country, cursed by a dying rival to crave the forbidden fruit of her own labors. Others whispered she made a pact with the spirits of the land, trading her humanity for eternal vitality. The hook that draws us deeper in 1923, a young journalist named Harlan Crow stumbled upon a diary in an abandoned cabin near Bull Shoals. The pages, yellowed and brittle, detailed births not as miracles, but as harvests. The child's cry is the sweetest song, one entry rid, and its flesh, the nectar that sustains. Crow vanished shortly after, his notes dismissed as the ravings of a madman. But the disappearances of newborns, attributed to stillbirths or wild animals, continued, a pattern etched into the collective memory of the hills. As we embark on this journey, feel the chill creep into your bones. The Ozarks are alive with unseen eyes, watching from the underbrush. The midwife's legacy is not just a story, it's a warning. that the most nurturing hands can conceal the sharpest claws, that birth, the dawn of life, can be twisted into a gateway for death. Listen closely, for in the silence between my words you might hear the faint wail of a child, echoing from the past, begging not to be forgotten. We begin our descent with the origins of this nightmare, tracing the bloodline back to its tainted roots. But beware, these tales have a way of burrowing into your dreams, feeding on your subconscious like the midwives fed on their prey. Settle in, dim the lights, and let the darkness envelop you. For in the throne of nightmares every story has teeth. And so, we delve into the heart of the tale, where the mist-shrouded hills of the Ozarks hide horrors that defy the light of day. Our story begins in the year 1847 amid the rugged terrain of what is now northern Arkansas. The Civil War was still a distant rumble, and the land was a frontier of promise and peril. Immigrants from the British Isles, fleeing potato famines and religious strife, poured into these mountains, bringing with them old-world superstitions that took root in the fertile soil of isolation. Eloan Hargrove was among them. A woman of indeterminate age, some said 30, others swore she looked timeless. She arrived alone, her wagon laden with herbs, midwifery tools, and a single leather-bound book whose pages were said to whisper when opened. She settled in a hollow near the White River, building a cabin from felled oaks, its walls insulated with moss that seemed to pulse with an unnatural vitality. The locals, sparse and wary, soon learned of her skills. Eloan could ease the pains of labor like no other, her chants in a forgotten tongue lulling mothers into a trance where agony melted into ecstasy. Her voice, a melodic rasp, wove through the air like smoke, carrying incantations that bent the will of pain itself. But Eloan's gifts came at a price, one hidden in the shadows of her practice. Her first delivery in the Ozarks was for a young couple, the McAllisters, whose farm clung to a steep hillside like a barnacle on a cliff face. Sarah McAllister, heavy with child, had labored for 2 days under the relentless assault of contractions that felt like the earth itself was tearing her apart. Her husband, Jedidiah, a wary man with calloused hands from tilling rocky soil, rode through the pouring rain to fetch the newcomer. Eloan arrived at midnight, her cloak dripping with water that smelled faintly of earth and something metallic, blood, perhaps, or rust from the river. The cabin was a hive of shadows, the only light from a sputtering fire and Eloan's lantern, which cast her face in a grotesque half. Light, one eye gleaming while the other hid in darkness. Sarah's cries filled the room, raw and animalistic, as Eloan knelt between her legs, her hands steady and cool, almost reptilian. She boiled a pot of herbs over the hearth, pennyroyal for its bitter bite, black cohosh to hasten the birth, and the steam filled the air, masking the scent of fear and exertion. "Breathe with the moon, child," Eloan murmured, her fingers probing with unnatural precision. The child emerged in a gush of fluid, slick and wailing, a healthy boy with skin like fresh cream. Eloan swaddled the babe in a coarse cloth, handing him to the exhausted mother with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But in the flickering light, no one noticed the small incision she made at the base of the umbilical cord with a sharpened bone needle, nor the way she collected a vial of the infant's first blood, slipping it into the folds of her apron like a thief in the night. That night, as the family slept in drugged slumber from Eloan's calming tea, she retreated to her own cabin across the hollow. There, in the solitude broken only by the hoot of an owl, she consumed the essence. She uncorked the vial, sipping the warm, coppery liquid, then sliced a thin strip from the discarded placenta, chewing it slowly. Her body convulsed in ecstatic renewal, veins bulging as if life itself was flooding back into her withered form. The child survived the night, but grew pale and listless in the weeks that followed, as if a part of his vitality had been siphoned away by invisible threads. Word of Eloan's miracles spread like wildfire through the dry underbrush of gossip. Barren women who had despaired for years found themselves with child after a single consultation, where Eloan prescribed teas brewed under the new moon. Breech births turned without complication, the infant sliding into the world as if guided by gentle spirits. Mothers raved of her touch, how it soothed like a lover's caress amid the torment. Yet, subtle anomalies began to emerge in the wake of her visits. Newborns delivered by her hand bore faint marks, tiny scars like bite wounds on the heels or behind the ears, that faded over time but left the children with an inexplicable melancholy. They spoke, as they grew, of dreams where a woman's face, kind yet ravenous, loomed over their cradles, her mouth opening wide in a silent scream. Eloan took apprentices, selecting young girls from the hollows who showed an affinity for the wild herbs and the rhythms of the body. First among them was her niece Mira, who arrived from Ireland in 1852, orphaned by the famine and feral as a mountain cat. Mira was barely 16, with hair like raven wings and eyes that pierced like thorns. She learned the arts under Eloan's watchful gaze. How to brew teas that induced labor with the precision of a surgeon, how to stitch wounds with spider silk threads that dissolved without a trace, and the secret rites whispered under the full moon, where blood oaths were sworn to the unseen forces of the land. But Eloan revealed the true source of their power only after Mira's first solo delivery, in a ramshackle cabin high on a ridge overlooking the Buffalo River. The mother was a trapper's wife, her belly swollen with a child conceived in the heat of a fleeting passion. Labor came swift and violent, the woman screaming as if demons clawed from within. Mira, hands trembling at first, channeled Eloan's teachings, her chants steadying the chaos. The child, a girl, tiny and fierce, emerged into the world with a cry that split the night. As the mother drifted into exhausted sleep, Eloan appeared like a spectre at the door. The child gives life to us as we give life to it. She intuned, her voice a rasp like wind through dead leaves. Together, they performed the rite in the corner shadows, a sliver of placenta carved away, raw and quivering, shared between them like communion. Mira felt a surge of unnatural strength course through her veins, her fatigue vanishing, replaced by a euphoric clarity that made the world sharper, the colors brighter, the hunger insatiable. The bloodline grew in the shadows of the following decades. By the 1860s, amid the chaos of the Civil War that turned brother against brother and left the hills scarred with smoke and sorrow, the midwives numbered 5. Eloan, Mira, and 3 others drawn into the fold, sisters from a nearby clan named the Blackwoods, their eyes mirroring the same shadowed hunger that now burned in Mira's gaze. They traversed the hills on horseback, their saddlebags clinking softly with vials of tinctures and knives honed to razor edges. The war brought opportunity in its wake, displaced families huddled in makeshift camps, wounded soldiers' wives giving birth amid the mud and misery. The midwives thrived, their feasts more frequent as desperation masked their predations. They slipped into tents under the guise of mercy, emerging with renewed vigor while another. Stillbirth was mourned. Eloan's appearance defied the passage of time. Now in her 50s by any reckoning, she looked no older than when she arrived, her skin taut, her movements fluid, but cracks appeared in the facade of their secrecy. In 1864, during a skirmish near Pea Ridge, a Union scout named Elias Thorne, a lanky man from Ohio with a penchant for journaling his horrors, stumbled upon a ritual in a secluded glen carpeted with ferns and illuminated by fireflies. Hidden in the underbrush, his heart pounding like war drums, he watched as the midwives circled a bonfire, their silhouettes elongated and demonic. They chanted in Gaelic tongues, words that slithered like serpents' invocations to ancient crones and earth mothers. At the center lay a stillborn infant, or so it seemed at first glance, its tiny form dissected with precision on a flat stone altar. They consumed morsels of flesh, raw and glistening, their faces illuminated by the flames, eyes rolling back in rapture as blood trickled from their lips. Thorne fled through the night, branches whipping his face like accusatory fingers, but not before being spotted by Mira's keen eyes. Days later, his body was found in a ravine, mangled beyond recognition, attributed to bear attacks by the locals, yet no tracks marred the soft earth, and his journal, recovered by comrades, spoke of women who eat the unborn light of God. The incident rippled through the community, fueling sermons in clapboard churches where preachers railed against the devil's brood in the hills. The narrative weaves onward through the post-war years, introducing the everyday veil that cloaked their abomination. Their cabins were sanctuaries of the macabre, hidden in coves where sunlight rarely ventured. Shelves lined the walls with jars of preserved tissues, labeled meticulously with dates and the names of mothers. Trophies of vitality stolen, bundles of dried umbilical cords hung like talismans from the rafters, swaying gently in draughts that carried faint, imagined whimpers. In the cellars dug deep into the hillside clay, shallow graves held the failures, infants too weak to survive the feeding, their tiny forms wrapped in oilcloth and buried under floors that creaked with spectral weight, as if the earth itself mourned. One particularly chilling event from this era unfolded in 1872, in the shadow of the Boston Mountains, involving the Becket family. Matilda Becket, a stout woman weathered by years of hardscrabble farming, was pregnant with twins, her belly a taut drum under her faded calico dress. Complications arose early, swelling, fever, and she summoned Mira after a local healer proved useless. The delivery took place in a cabin battered by autumn winds, the air thick with the scent of drying tobacco leaves. Mira arrived with her kit, her presence calming Matilda's terror. The first twin emerged hale and hearty, a boy with lungs like bellows. The second, however, was frail, its cries feeble as a dying bird. As Matilda drifted into exhausted sleep, aided by Mira's sedative brew, the midwife performed the rite alone. In the dim corner, she severed a finger from the weaker child with a swift stroke, the bone cracking softly. She consumed it raw, the flesh warm and yielding, feeling the spark of life ignite within her like a forbidden flame. The surviving twin, a girl named Leela, grew up haunted by visions of her siblings' cries, fragmented dreams that plagued her nights. At age 12, Leela vanished into the woods during a full moon, drawn by an inexplicable pull toward the river's edge, her body never found. Though locals whispered of a splash heard in the dead of night, tension built inexorably as suspicions simmered beneath the surface like a pot on the boil. Preachers in nearby towns like Harrison and Mountain View railed against witch women from their pulpits, citing biblical passages on those who devour their own young, their voices thundering like Judgment Day. Yet fear kept outright accusations at bay. The midwives' services were indispensable in a land where doctors were scarce as gold, and a difficult birth could mean death for mother and child alike. They masked their predations with the rich tapestry of folklore, tales of changelings, stolen by fairies from the old country, or mountain spirits claiming the weak, explaining away the marked children and the occasional empty cradle. As this first chapter of our nightmare draws to a close, we witness the bloodline's insidious expansion. Aloan passed in 1885, or so it was whispered among the hollows, her body found withered in her bed, drained of all essence as if the land had reclaimed its due. But whispers persisted of her spirit lingering, a guiding force in the wind, urging her descendants onward. Mira took the mantle with ruthless grace, birthing daughters of her own in secret rituals, each initiated into the hunger under the watchful eyes of the coven. The stage is now set for escalation, as the encroaching shadows of modernity threaten to illuminate the darkness, and the midwives' curse begins to unravel at the seams. The shadows lengthen as we venture into the second act of this macabre symphony, where the midwives' curse tightens its grip like roots strangling a sapling, and the line between nurturer and predator blurs into oblivion. By the turn of the century, with the calendar flipping to the 1900s, the bloodline had proliferated into a shadowy network of women spanning from Missouri's boothial marshes to Arkansas's rugged peaks. Their influence a web spun across forgotten valleys. Mira Hargrove, now the unchallenged matriarch, her hair streaked with silver but her frame unbowed by time, had trained a cadre of sisters, not all bound by blood, but by the shared sacrament of consumption, oaths sealed in the blood of the innocent. Their hunger had evolved. No longer sated by mere slivers of placenta or drops of first blood, they craved the full vitality, the pulsing heart of new life, leading to bolder acts that sowed the seeds of their eventual undoing. The railroads began slicing through the Ozarks in 1905 like iron veins pumping outsiders into the heartland, bringing with them doctors, surveyors, and the cold light of progress. The midwives adapted with cunning born of centuries, posing as itinerant healers or peddlers of tonics, their wagons disguised with colorful banners and bundles of seemingly innocuous roots. But isolation bred paranoia within their ranks, and internal conflicts arose like thorns on a briar patch. One such schism ignited in 1907 with an apprentice named Thessaly Crowe, a sharp-eyed girl of 18 from a poor branch of the family, descended from a line that had long resisted the full embrace of the right. Thessaly had joined Mira's fold reluctantly, drawn by promises of power to lift her family from poverty. But her stomach turned at the deeper rituals. The breaking point came during a delivery in a squalid cabin near Taney County, where the air hung heavy with the stench of unwashed bodies and despair. The mother was a miner's wife, her husband lost in a cave in months prior. Her belly swollen with the fruit of grief fueled solace. Labor dragged through the night, Thessaly assisting Mira with trembling hands, boiling cloths and chanting half-heartedly. The child was robust, a boy with fists clenched like a fighter, his cry echoing off the tin roof. But Mira, her eyes alight with feral need, demanded the full feast, insisting the mother's poverty made the loss merciful, a stillbirth to spare the babe a life of want. Thessaly refused, her voice a whisper of defiance. "This is no mercy, it's murder." In a blur of motion, she fled into the storm-lashed night. The swaddled infant clutched to her chest, disappearing into the labyrinth of trails. Mira's pursuit was relentless, a hunt that spanned days, her howls blending with the wolves that roamed the ridges. Thessaly's body was later found at the base of a cliff, her throat slit clean with a midwife's knife, the child gone, presumed devoured by wildlife, or worse, reclaimed by the coven as punishment. This schism fractured the group, sending ripples of doubt through the younger initiates, while hardening the resolve of the elders like Isolde, Mira's eldest daughter, a woman whose beauty was as cold as winter frost. Isolde embraced the darkness fully, her experiments pushing the boundaries of their curse. Her diary, later unearthed in a hollow tree by scavengers, detailed the transference, a rite where consuming an infant's heart whole allowed the absorption of its untapped years, granting unnatural longevity. In 1912, during the grip of a brutal influenza outbreak that ravaged the hills like a reaper's scythe, Isolde delivered triplets to a family in Stone County, their cabin a fever den of coughing and delirium. The parents, weakened by the sickness, barely registered the births. 2 of the babes were sacrificed in the woodshed, their tiny hearts extracted and devoured by Isolde under the cover of night. Witnesses, surviving kin, spoke in hushed tones of her skin glowing ethereally afterward, her steps silent as a ghost's tread on fallen leaves, her laughter carrying on the wind like a siren's call. Haunting events multiplied as the decade wore on, weaving a tapestry of terror that the official records could not contain. In 1918, as the Great War's distant thunder faded and the Spanish flu swept through the Ozarks, claiming thousands in its wake, a wave of crib deaths plagued the region. Coroners attributed them to sudden infant mortality syndrome, the air thick with platitudes about God's will, but locals knew better, their eyes darting to the shadows when midwives passed. One survivor, an elderly man interviewed decades later in a nursing home far from the hills, recalled his own birth with a shudder. The midwife's hands were cold as river stones, gripping me like vices, and when she leaned close to wipe my brow, her breath smelled of copper pennies and rotting meat. His twin had vanished from the cradle by morning, chalked up to stillbirth, but the dreams that plagued him spoke of a sibling's muffled screams echoing from beneath the floorboards. The narrative intensifies with the unwelcome arrival of outsiders, harbingers of the midwife's fraying veil. In 1920, as part of a federal health initiative spurred by the flu's devastation, teams of trained nurses ventured into the backwoods, their starched uniforms a stark contrast to the homespun rags of the locals. One such nurse, Evelyn Hart, a prim woman from Saint Louis with a notebook full of zeal, documented strange occurrences in her field reports, mothers waking from drugged slumbers induced by herbal aids. To find their newborns marked with faint bruises, their vitality ebbed as if drained by leeches. Hart confronted Isolde directly in a crossroads saloon, her voice sharp with accusation. "These are not natural deaths. There's foul play in these hills." Days later, Hart vanished during a solo ride to a remote hollow, her horse found wandering riderless, her journal's final entry a scrawled warning. "These women are not healers, they are harvesters of souls, feasting on the light we bring into the world." Deeper into the nightmare we plunge, uncovering a ritualistic gathering in 1922 that stands as a pinnacle of their depravity. Deep in the dripping caverns near Blanchard Springs, where the air was chill and heavy with the scent of mineral water and bat guano, the midwives convened under a blood moon that painted the entrance crimson. Torches flickered on wet walls, casting shadows that writhed like living entities. They chanted in a polyphony of Gaelic and invented tongues, invoking ancient entities, perhaps the Celtic goddess Bab, harbinger of battle and birth pangs, or the local spirits of the Osage, restless ancestors demanding tribute. At the center of the circle, on a slab of limestone slick with condensation, lay a living infant, born that very night to an unwitting mother lured to the site under false pretenses of a blessing ceremony. The child was offered up, its cries muffled by a cloth gag as the women fed collectively, teeth sinking into tender limbs, blood staining the stone in ritual patterns, their bodies writhing in communal ecstasy that echoed off the stalactites like the moans of the damned. A stray hunter, old Josiah Reed, witnessed the horror from a hidden crevice, his lantern accidentally illuminating the scene. He fled screaming into the night, his mind shattered. By dawn, he was found babbling incoherently in a town square, foaming at the mouth as he described, "Woman with fangs like wolves, devouring the future whole." He was committed to an asylum, his ravings dismissed as delirium tremens from moonshine. The climax of this darkening saga arrives with Harlan Crow, the ill-fated journalist whose 1923 discovery threatened to tear the veil asunder. Descended from the rebellious Thessaly, Harlan was a city-bred skeptic from Little Rock, drawn back to his roots by tales of family secrets. Armed with a notebook and a Brownie camera, he unearthed Mira's diary in the crumbling ruins of the old Hargrove cabin near Bullshoals Lake, its pages brittle as autumn leaves, stained with what smelled faintly of iron. The entries detailed centuries of feedings, meticulous lists of victims, hundreds, perhaps thousands, blended with recipes for immortality. Mix the heart's blood with wolfsbane under the equinox, drink to steal the years. One chilling passage read, "The newborn's cry is the key, unlocking the door to endless night, where age flees and youth is devoured." Harlan photographed the damning pages, his hands shaking, convinced he had stumbled upon the story of the century. But before he could wire his editor or flee the hills, he disappeared. His Ford Model T was found overturned on a muddy road, headlights still burning, body missing save for a single shoe caked in red clay. Diary pages were scattered like confetti in the wind, some bearing fresh bite marks. His notes, recovered by searchers, were dismissed as the ravings of a madman overcome by the isolation, but a few survived, hinting at the truth. As modernity advanced with the Roaring Twenties, the midwives retreated deeper into the uncharted wilds, their numbers dwindling but their resolve unyielding. By the 1930s, with the Great Depression's jaws clamping down on the nation, they preyed on migrant families streaming into the Ozarks seeking work in the nascent national parks. Their acts were disguised as mercy killings amid the starvation, a quick end to suffering babies too weak to nurse. Isolde's granddaughter, Vesper, emerged as the new leader, a lithe woman with eyes like polished obsidian and a smile that disarmed like honeyed whiskey. Her beauty was unearthly, drawing unwary men into her traps during lonely nights, their seed used to perpetuate the line, only for the resulting offspring to become fodder for the right. Chilling moments abound in these lean years in 1935. A ferocious storm trapped a sharecropper's family in their leaky cabin with Vesper, who had come to assist with the impending birth. Lightning cracked the sky as the child emerged, but by morning the newborn had vanished, the cradle empty save for a smear of blood on the quilt. Vesper departed with cheeks flushed unnaturally pink, humming a lullaby that curdled the milk in the mother's breasts. Whispers of shape, shifting added layers of terror. Tales of midwives turning to great horned owls to scout prey from the skies, their talons dripping with phantom gore. This part of our tale culminates in a violent confrontation in 1940, as the world teetered on the brink of another war. A grizzled sheriff from Boone County, tipped off by fragments of Harlan's surviving notes, passed through underground channels, assembled a posse, and raided a gathering in a remote glade. Gunfire echoed through the trees like thunderclaps, the acrid smell of powder mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Bodies fell, 2 midwives cut down in the crossfire, their faces frozen in snarls, but the survivors, led by Vesper, melted into the mist like wraiths, their laughter mocking the pursuers from the fog. Vesper escaped, her lineage scattering to the winds, but the hunger endured, a curse unbound by death or bullet, lurking in the blood of descendants who walk among us still. To fully grasp the bone, deep chill of this tale, to feel it seep into your marrow like the damp of an Ozark cave, we must peel back the layers of history and folklore that cloak these mountains like a shroud woven from spider silk and human regret. This region, the Ozark Plateau, spanning the borders of Arkansas, southern Missouri, eastern Oklahoma, and even fringes of Kansas, is a tapestry of cultural isolation forged in the fires of migration and hardship. Here, European traditions, primarily from Scotch, Irish, German, and English settlers, mingled uneasily with the lingering spirits of Native American lore from the Osage, Cherokee, and Quapaw peoples, birthing hybrids of superstition, survival, and something far darker. The midwife story, while laced with the grotesque hues of horror fiction, draws from real practices and legends that have been passed down orally around hearth fires, in moonlit hollers, and in the yellowed pages of folklorists' collections. It blends fact with the eerie authenticity of half-remembered truths, creating a sense of unsettling reality that lingers long after the telling. Midwifery in the Ozarks traces its roots to the late 18th century, when waves of settlers poured into the hills following the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. These were hardy folk, Scotch, Irish Presbyterians fleeing religious persecution and land enclosures in the British Isles, Germans seeking fertile valleys after the failed revolutions of 1848, and English yeomen escaping industrial grime. Childbirth was a perilous rite, with maternal mortality rates soaring in isolation, up to 1 in 100 in some hollows, far higher than urban centers. Doctors were luxuries for the wealthy. Instead, communities relied on local midwives, known as granny women, herb doctors, or simply the wise ones. These were matriarchs whose skills were passed down through matrilineal lines, unbound by formal education or licensing, a tradition as old as the Appalachian chain itself from which the Ozarks branched. In a land where the nearest hospital might be a week's journey over treacherous trails, these midwives handled upwards of 90% of births until the mid-20th century. They wielded an arsenal of natural remedies forged from the wild bounty. Red raspberry leaf teas to tone the uterus and ease labor pains, blue cohosh root infusions to induce contractions when stalled, willow bark poultices for feverish afterpains, and sassafras brews to cleanse the blood post-delivery. These echoed precisely the herbal arsenal attributed to Elowen and her kin, grounding the tale in historical authenticity. Yet, the darkness lurking in folklore elevates this to nightmare. The Ozarks teem with witch tales, preserved in collections like Vance Randolph's seminal Ozark Magic and Folklore, so 1947, where witch balls, spheres of hair, nails, and herbs were hung in cabins to ward off malevolent spirits. Power doctors, often midwives by trade, cured ailments with spells involving animal parts or whispered incantations, blurring the line between healing and hexing. Cannibalism motifs, central to our story, appear woven into the cultural fabric. Native Osage legends speak of the Wazahaj, flesh-eating spirits who devoured the young to sustain their immortality, a cautionary echo of predatory midwifery. European imports like the Brothers Grimm's, Hansel and Gretel, tales of witches luring children to ovens, found fertile soil among settlers, morphing into local variants where hags in the woods craved infant stew. The very idea of feeding on newborns resonates with historical precedents of infanticide during famines, such as the Irish potato famine that drove Eloan's ancestors westward. In desperate times, unwanted or sickly babes were exposed or smothered, deaths disguised as stillbirths to avoid scandal or legal repercussions. In the Ozarks, post-Civil War poverty amplified this. Records from the 1870s show clusters of unexplained infant disappearances blamed on wildcats or the pox, mirroring the midwives' cover stories. Cultural trauma provides the fertile ground for such horrors to take root. The Trail of Tears in the 1830s forcibly displaced thousands of Cherokee and other tribes through these very hills, their suffering imprinting a collective grief. Spirits of the displaced, haints in local parlance, were said to haunt births, stealing souls or twisting them into changelings. Post-Civil War, the Ozarks became a lawless frontier. Bushwhacker guerrillas and family feuds like the Hatfields and McCoy's kin bred a culture of secrecy and vigilante justice. Isolation fostered endogamy, leading to whispers of cursed bloodlines, wherein breeding allegedly produced monstrous urges, a pseudoscientific excuse for the midwives' aberration. Real cases parallel the fictional depravity, lending an eerie verisimilitude. In the 1890s, a Missouri midwife named Sarah Whitcomb was accused in county courts of poisoning infants for meager life insurance payouts. Her remedies, laced with arsenic, a predatory act that echoes the Hargroves' selective feedings. In Appalachian folklore, kin to Ozark tales, graveyard midwives were said to bury placentas with curses or worse, harvest them for spells requiring youthful essence. The 1918 influenza pandemic, which killed over 50 million worldwide and hit rural America hard, saw infant mortality spike. Some survivors blamed witch midwives for spiking teas with toxins, a blend of fear and fact that fuels our narrative. Delve deeper into the Celtic roots that Eloan embodies Irish banshees, wailing harbingers at births portending death, and the K-Leech, a hag goddess of winter who consumed the youth of the land to endure eternally. The name Eloan, Cornish for elm tree, evokes folklore of eternal witches bound to ancient woods. Scotch-Irish ballads sung in Ozark fiddles speak of the midwife's curse, where a woman slighted devours her charges in revenge. These elements blend seamlessly, creating authenticity that unsettles. Educational yet eerie, consider the Ozark Folk Center in Mountain View, Arkansas, a living museum preserving these traditions. Curators there speak in hushed tones of lost diaries, unearthed during restorations, hinting at darker practices suppressed by church and state. Archaeological digs at sites like the Blanchard Springs caverns have uncovered infant bones in unusual cluster burials. Ritualistic, perhaps, fueling speculation among anthropologists. The Great Depression of the 1930s exacerbated vulnerabilities. WPA records document midwives like the fictional Hargroves exploiting desperate migrant families, their roles eroding as federal programs professionalized birth with the shepherd. Towner Act of 1921, introducing trained nurses and clinics. This shift may have driven the bloodline underground, their practices evolving into subtler predations. Folklore collections abound with corroboration. Randolph's volumes detail spells requiring the blood of the unbaptized for longevity, and Mary Alicia Owen's Voodoo Tales, 1893, from nearby Missouri, touches on cannibalistic rites among hill folk. This blend of documented history and whispered legend creates a sense of the story as distorted mirror rather than mere invention. A reflection of human depravity amplified by isolation, where the line between survival and monstrosity dissolves. As we listen to these echoes, feel the prickle on your skin. The Ozarks' past isn't buried, it's waiting hungry in the roots of every shadowed tree. Beneath the visceral gore and spectral chills of the Ozark Midwives' tale lies a labyrinth of symbolism and psychological depth. a shadowy undercurrent that probes the recesses of the human psyche and connects to the primal fears etched into our collective soul. This narrative is no mere recounting of atrocity, it is a mirror held to the darkest aspects of motherhood, survival, and the eternal dance between creation and destruction. Let us dissect it with an ominous intellect, layer by layer, as if peeling back the skin of a still, warm corpse to reveal the writhing truths within. At its core, the midwives embody the devouring mother archetype, a motif as ancient as cave paintings and as Freudian as the subconscious itself. Sigmund Freud's concept of the vagina dentata, the toothed womb that threatens to consume the child upon entry or exit, manifests here in literal, grotesque form. Birth, the ultimate act of nurturing, is perverted into predation. The midwives' hens, instruments of life, become tools of harvest. Eloin's first feeding, sipping the infant's blood like a vampire at the cradle, symbolizes the mother's unconscious urge to reclaim what she has given, a psychological backlash against the vulnerability of creation. In devouring the newborn, they invert the Oedipal complex, not the child fearing the parent, but the parent fearing, and then consuming, their own replacement, the inexorable march of generations that renders them obsolete. Thematically, this tale connects to universal fears that transcend the Ozark's misty confines, tapping into cultural traumas that scar humanity. Newborns represent untainted innocence, the dawn of potential. To feed on them is to devour the future, a metaphor for societal ills that prey on the young. In the context of the Ozark's history, famine, war, displacement, the midwives mirror how poverty and isolation consume the vulnerable, much like the Dust Bowl migrations or modern opioid crises that hollow out rural communities. It's a commentary on inherited trauma, epigenetic shadows where the sins of ancestors manifest in the blood, compelling descendants to repeat the cycle. Mirror's lineage, perpetuating through forced births and ritual feedings, evokes the horror of generational curses, akin to Greek tragedies like the House of Atreus, where cannibalism begets endless vendettas. Psychologically, the hunger signifies an addiction to power, a Jungian shadow self unleashed. Carl Jung described the shadow as the repressed aspects of personality. Here, the midwife's nurturing facade conceals the beast within, the Eddie's raw drive for survival overriding societal superego. Isolde's transference right, absorbing a child's lifespan, grapples with mortality anxiety, the terror of aging in a youth-obsessed world. It parallels real postpartum disorders, where the bond of motherhood twists into obsessive possession, the line between love and devouring blurs, as in cases of Munchausen by proxy, where caregivers harm to maintain control. Thessaly's rebellion highlights the ego's struggle for individuation, her flight a doomed assertion against the collective unconscious of the coven. Universal fears amplify the dread, the peril of birth itself, where 1 in 5 women in 19th century rural America died in childbirth, transforming joy into terror. Maternal betrayal strikes at the core of trust. If the hand that rocks the cradle can devour, what sanctuary remains? This resonates with global myths, the Japanese Yuki, honor who freezes children, or African Anansi tales of spider mothers trapping offspring, revealing a shared human dread of nurture turned necrotic. In a broader lens, it critiques bioethics. Modern parallels in organ harvesting scandals or genetic experiments evoke the same chill. Where science devours innocence for progress, human nature's ominous side emerges starkly, survival instincts Darwinian in extremity, where consumption ensures immortality at any cost. The midwife's evolution from subtle sips to full feasts mirrors adaptation gone awry, a caution against unchecked primal urges. It probes the banality of evil, how ordinary women bound by tradition and desperation become monsters, echoing Hannah Arendt's observations on thoughtless obedience. Intellectually haunting, the tale leaves questions that fester. Does consent exist in such a bloodline, or is it predestined? Harlan's disappearance suggests knowledge as a curse, the observer ensnared by the observed. Thematically, it warns of cultural amnesia. By burying these stories, we invite their return, like repressed memories surfacing in nightmares. In connecting to broader traumas, The Holocaust's devouring of innocence, colonial exploitations, it underscores humanity's capacity for horror, yet hints at redemption in resistance, like Thessaly's stand. As we contemplate these depths, feel the unease settle, this is no distant legend, but a reflection of our shadows, whispering that within every cradle lurks the potential for teeth. As our descent through the throne of nightmares draws to its inevitable, fog-shrouded close, we emerge from the Ozark's suffocating depths, our souls etched with the faint scars of cries long silenced by time and soil. The tale of the Ozark Midwives, who fed on their newborns, unwinds like a frayed umbilical cord, severed yet pulsing with residual life, leaving us to ponder the fragile boundary between sustenance and sacrilege. From Eloan's cursed arrival in 1847, her wagon creaking under the weight of forbidden knowledge, to Vesper's spectral flight in 1940 amid gunfire and mist, this bloodline has woven a tapestry of horror, hands that guided souls into the world, twisted to drag them back into oblivion, feasts hidden in the sanctity of birth cabins, and a legacy that defies extinction. In summary, we trace the roots from Eloan's primal hunger, sating herself on the McAllister boys' essence under lantern light, to Mira's expansion of the coven during war's chaos, their rituals in Glen fires devouring the innocent amid chants that curdled the air. Schisms like Thessaly's rebellion cracked the facade, only for Isolde's experiments to deepen the abyss, her transference rites stealing years from flu-ravaged triplets. Harlan Crow's diary discovery in 1923 pierced the veil, his vanishing a testament to the story's devouring nature, while Vesper's era preyed on depression migrants, storms masking empty cradles. Confrontations came, but the coven scattered like leaves in an autumn gale, their hunger undimmed. Yet this is no tidy end. The midwives' legacy endures as a spectral warning, etched into the very rocks and rivers of the Ozarks. Descendants may walk unmarked among us, pale children with melancholy eyes, drawn inexplicably to the healing arts, their dreams haunted by copper-scented breaths. The curse unbound by graves whispers in the wind through the pines, in the cry of the whip-poor will at dusk, reminding us that the cradle of life can harbor the jaws of death. A lingering question haunts the silence. In these quiet hills, do the marked ones stir still, their veins thrumming with stolen vitality, waiting for the next harvest under a blood moon? Or has modernity's light banished them, only for shadows to regroup in forgotten corners? Ponder this as the night deepens, dear listeners, for in the throne of nightmares, every ending is but a prelude to the feast. Thank you for joining me in this unraveling. Until next time, guard your thresholds, and may your dreams be free of ravenous hands. Sleep if you can.